turn my music down a little bit. My little crappy 90s techno that I love so much.
That's good.
That's actually, I mean, that works out. Like that's what when I'm writing or something, I just put on like the worst, cheapest, like late 90s, early 2000s electronic stuff. That's like the stuff you'd hear in a TJ Maxx or a Ross or something.
I've melded into hip hop lo-fi live streams. Dude, just jam it and just get to work.
You know Those two, yep.
There was a study that was done that they said that like if you really need to have good concentration background music, to do like 8-bit video game music.
Yeah.
Because that stuff was designed to like keep you in that focused mindset when you were playing the games.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It does make sense. I've never been into the 8-bit thing though. I just never.
Well, but like
never did much for me.
He's a little too young, Dr. Wyman.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
You're too young to have been playing on the Nintendo, but you know.
I had a Game Boy Color.
I had a rock and a stick, and I was lucky to have both those at the same time. Okay.
I had to borrow the rock from my mom.
It was her favorite rock.
Oh. Well, welcome everybody. This is episode 4 of CornStars, which is brought to you by BlackBoxCages.com. So BlackBox, right here. BlackBoxCages.com is a network sponsor because we haven't done an episode here for like a month or 2 months, something like that. So a little bit's changed. BlackBox.com, please check them out. Rax Cages, you need them, check them out. Going to Atlanta this weekend with Jake. BlackBox is gonna be there vending at the Show Me Snakes Marietta show, and we're gonna be picking up some stuff for ourselves, and it's gonna be a good weekend off. I'm very much looking forward to it. So check them out, Facebook and Instagram, and then BlackBoxCages.com, and then our buddy JT, or buddies I should say, JT and Mindy at Silent Hill Reptiles. Give them a shout. He's got some awesome stuff getting paired up. I'm very excited to see what he produces, and I'm also kind of terrified as to what he's going to be producing because it's all just so damn nice. It's hard, and you scroll through Morph Market, you scroll through like VMS and stuff like that, and you just, if money were no option, man, just be buying it all.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, JT's got a huge lineup this year of what he's going to be producing. And some of it's just absolutely spectacular. Anybody's going to be lucky to get their hands on any of that. And he's cheap, man, for what it's worth as far as snake pricing goes. He's very reasonable and damn good genetics. Yeah,
he's. I'm thoroughly convinced that from now until in the the foreseeable future, like he's going to be one of the top producers of corn snakes. Just the stuff he's doing, it's so choice and. Just awesome stuff. What I have from him currently is phenomenal. Definitely planning on getting more. So.
Oh yeah.
But this episode we're going to be talking about line breeding a little bit with our buddy Dr. Travis Wyman. I figured this would be a good. Like we hear line breeding a lot, not even just in corns, but with carpets and other stuff. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to sort of break it down. Apparently there's a giant wasp on the wall right there. He's hanging out.
Our fourth guest, giant wasp.
Yeah,
giant.
Go ahead,
come in.
Jimmy the giant wasp.
We'd love to hear about your lineage.
I don't know. I'm not. If you're expecting me to like kill it or something, I ain't. That thing that looks like a murder hornet. I ain't touching it.
I was gonna say, is it Maurice the murder hornet?
It's freaking huge. Whatever it is.
Go ahead, and bring Maurice in. We got.
You're
questions.
Outdoors in the garage. These things happen.
Hey, I do want to go ahead and give a little personal shout out. I have some sponsors of my own.
You do?
Yeah. That's going to be anxiety, depression, and male pattern baldness. Hey, guys, y'all are really kicking me in the fucking balls. I really appreciate it. Life's
shout out
terrible.
to your dentist that you went to today, too.
And huge shout out to the 5 fillings I got today. You're the best, right? Like, tell me more about beer and cigarettes.
Show me the tooth.
Show me the tooth.
Yeah, they were like, you should, when I went not that long ago, they were like, you should consider not smoking anymore. I was like,
You should consider watching your tone before I sign this fucking bill.
Yeah. Check yourself, Dr. Pepe. She's awesome though.
Yeah.
Shout out to Port Royal Dentistry. Yeah, so line breeding. I'm going to talk about that a little, well, a lot of bit. Sort of get Travis's take on it, since that's, I guess, relevant to your realm in a sense. I feel like we say you're a geneticist and stuff all the time, and you're kind of like, you're in it, but you're not like in it, if that makes any sense. Like,
it
it's
makes
not
sense. I mean,
it's not like your direct line, like general genetics are not like your direct line of work, but you are.
No, but for my direct line of work, I have to understand general genetics. So while it's not the work that I do directly,
Right.
it's part of my wheelhouse to get there. So,
well, you're also just a smart dude with sage wisdom that I feel like we're always asking you very simple questions.
or you just get my opinion on things whether or not you asked them.
That too. Hey, that's good. That works. Chris, what are you smoking?
Oh, I have the one of those Herrera Esteli Habanos. Man, these are good.
They are very good.
I think I got one or two left. This is my last one. I might have one more after this, but yeah, they're delicious.
I got a handful from the last event we did with them, and they didn't last very long.
What a good cigar! Just a good.
It's phenomenal, man. For the price, they're really hard to beat. They're very good.
Lots of complexity, lots of flavor, and something that's not too crazy.
Yeah. Breeding updates, though, Chris. What do you got going on? We'll jump into that real quick, and then we'll move on to the meat and potatoes.
I reckon for this show, I'll talk about corn snakes and the like. I have a gravid female. So when I took everything out of brumation this year, I went ahead and started pairing after the third meal. I like to do that because sometimes females do ovulate a little early after brumation. Mm-hmm. Some people talk about that. Some people don't. Some people are strict on the after the first shed thing. With some species, I think that you want to pair before the first shed. With corn snakes, I think you're fine. You're okay. A cat just walked in my garage. It freaked me out. I almost had a heart attack. Just so y'all
Gremlins.
Yep, that's Skittles, the neighborhood cat. Sorry. But yeah, so with some species, you want to go ahead and pair early. I did that with some of my corns. But it turns out that worked because a pair that I got from JT at Silent Hill, JT and Mindy, my caramel Miamis, which it's genetics specifically on those are caramel, Poshet Cinder, Poshet Diffuse, both 100% het sun-kissed, so het honey.
Oh, yeah.
And they have the Miami, we call it lineage, but maybe when we talk about that a little bit more, it's Miami phase because they may not actually have direct Miami lineage in them because a phase is a thing. But my female is gravid. Looks like she's getting ready to go into her post-lay shed or pre-lay shed, excuse me. I've seen a lot of activity out of everything else. I've paired up my Cinder Tessera het diffused male to a diffused het. I'm sorry, charcoal Tessera het diffused male. It's Mr. Gray. He paired up to a old school blood red pied het charcoal female. She just had her shed a couple days ago, so they've just started doing their thing. And then I have a pewter, which is going to be charcoal and diffused combined that I've paired to him. And she had her post brumation shed maybe 2 weeks ago, so they've been looking pretty good. She's already pretty swollen. I don't know if that's kind of just an apparent ovulation, or if she may be in the early signs of gravidity. I don't know if that's a word. It's a word now. Go ahead and coin that. Hit me up if anybody wants the NFT.
Trademark.
Trademark. It is now gravidity. Shirts will be dropping. It's going to be a hot drop. They're going to be like Supreme collab, but whatever. My main male, Mac, he is a Ultramel, Motley Tessera het anery. He has paired already to my A-Mel Motley girl. I don't know if she's het anery. We're going to find out this year. Raise her from Little Squiggle. He's paired up to my J&G line Ghost, which is something we're going to be talking about because she is what is old school known as Aztec. which is an aberrancy that happens, but it's not a recessive trait. So maybe we can get into that.
It was Tessera before it was Tessera.
It was Tessera before it was Tessera. This is old school Aztec, but she is JMG line ghost, so she's hypo, anery, and redcoat. Some people call them salmon, some call them super salmon, some people call them corals.
Yeah,
pick your
the whole
name, but
thing's
it's
very
the,
confusing. It's worth an entire episode.
Yeah, it's the dominant red gene. And then he is also paired to a ghost female, a beautiful little girl I got from Joe Phelan, who I paired him once and don't actually plan on pairing them again. Now that I've had that pair going, I'm kind of looking at all of my pairings and thinking, maybe we don't push that one too hard. And then I've got a male stripe anery, unknown hets due to his mother. Now he's going to be a son of Mac, who I was just talking about, that has been showing some promising signs to his mother, who is an anery het stripe, pos het sunkist, pos het hypo, and he is gorgeous. I send pictures to y'all all the time of him. Big, huge yellow throat that goes all the way down to his midriff, and it looks like they've been getting real comfy. And then along those same lines, my Slewinski eye, which will lump kind of in the corn family. I have a pair of wild types that are het anery, het silverleaf, that look like they've been getting the business on. And then I've got a silverleaf female that's het anery also. And she's going into her first shed. The other two shed really quick after brumation, and it looks like they were pretty aggressive. The female silverleaf wasn't a good eater going into brumation. Once I was brumating everything else, she kind of took off like a rock star. And now post brumation, she's actually bigger than the other female. I hit my females pretty hard that are not breeding when they're not in brumation during the winter, because I keep my room at a good temp with heat. So I may go ahead. She's in shed right now, and after shed, pair her up. Slewinski eye are a little smaller, but they kind of follow the same rules as corn snakes. So your 3-3-3 roll.
Close enough, yeah.
Yeah, they're close enough. She's definitely old enough and big enough to party. So we may throw them in, but other than that, corn snake wise, that's the family right now.
So I don't know. I mean, I've tried pairing stuff last year and this year before that first shed, and I have yet to have really any luck with that. So I don't know. There's plenty of people that have done it, but for whatever reason, when I've the handful of times I've tried it, I've completely struck out. So I've pretty much given up on even trying.
Yeah,
I just wait for that shed. Might as well. I think that's when the females really throw off the signals that they're they're ready to go. And I know the males, they would breed regardless, but the females just don't seem to be into it when they're in a shed, for me at least. And it could just be the animals I have, who knows? But
yeah, I mean, in 3 years, it's the first time it's ever happened.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's a small. I'll pair them 2 or maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times, just to sometimes a couple hours, sometimes overnight, but not like a heavy. Like, okay, you guys are pairing now. You just shed. You're staying in there for 3 nights or whatever.
Right. I mean, I had females that were clearly on sort of the other side of a shed cycle, so they were getting ready to shed, and I put the male in with them just to see if they would do anything. And the male definitely tried, at least with the one pair in particular, with my Ladies Island stuff, and he was definitely trying. He was giving it his all, but she wasn't into it. So I just waited for her to shed out and put them together, and they were locked up the other morning. So I'm going to be doing the another same female that produced the Ladies Island stuff from last year, but a different male that's also a Ladies Island from the same general property. And then the darker male that was the sire to that clutch, he's going to a Beaufort County. That little part of town's called Shell Point, so I call her the Shell Point female, depending, I guess, on how extreme you want to get with the locality stuff. I've had that girl since 2018, and she was like fresh out of the egg when she was brought to me. So those are going to go together, and Bairds are going, Elafe are going, Bimaculata and Dion's. I got those pied blood reds, and I put those together. They were shipped together in the bag, so I'm thinking there's probably a decent chance that they made something happen.
It's possible, yeah.
So they're together. What else? thorn scrub rats that I got from you.
My man.
They're together. The male's in a shed right now too, like deep in shed. So I don't know if anything's going to happen with them quite yet. I haven't seen any action. What else? I have that female from you, that ghost tessera.
With them, yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me given how sort of shy they are.
Yeah, they're shy. They're wild caught. You might not catch copulation with them.
I have that ghost tessera from you that I'm probably gonna end up pairing to that Dark Ladies Island male anyways. Just because the blood red stuff's in quarantine for the next couple weeks, and
F1.
I know you've already been down that road, so yeah. What else? I feel like I'm missing something. I don't know. Mostly locality stuff with the corns and then the blood reds and that female from you. And then all the other stuff.
Yeah.
We'll see. I've noticed some locks, I've noticed some action, but still waiting on some things to sort of come around and make something happen. So
yeah, you'll kind of start noticing second year in your collection having bred some of those pairs or have some of those animals having bred a little bit more comfort in them when those hormones start to spike. It's not like in the wild where it's kind of free range. Though you do a little bit of free range in your collection. But I tend to see out of wild caught animals, you'll actually start seeing copulation in second, third, fourth year. It seems like to me. I'm saying this from my sandbox, and I think you did catch a little bit of copulation.
Yeah, I didn't. So I didn't see last year when I paired the Ladies Island stuff together. I did not see any actual locks, but they clearly made it happen. So I have no doubt that they will. It's just, it's not like the Diones. I put them together, dude. And I feel like they've been locked every day since I put that male in with her like a week ago. Like they've just been constantly locked up. So
yeah, my O3 Ophis, every time I put them together, they are locking up. They're just ready to go. So, and it's kind of funny. The male's really shy, and the female isn't. The female's, I hate to say outgoing. Snakes don't have that necessary personality, but she's a little bit less skittish,
more curious.
Yeah, a little more curious. So whenever I put him in to her enclosure, she starts getting the wiggles and the shakes and the jumps and pushing up against them. And I've seen 2 or 3 locks with them now. So kind of fingers crossed that I'll get to experience that species.
That'd be awesome. That'd be office. But so line breeding, we hear it a lot in all corners of the hobby. Is there an official definition for as far as line breeding in the actual scientific side of genetics? Like, is there a clear cut, like, this is what we in the professional line of work call a line?
Yes. So it's generally considered to be a strategic selective breeding that is primarily inbreeding of close relatives in order to enhance or perpetuate a specific trait or set of traits. So that would be what line breeding is.
So strategic selective breeding.
Yes. More specifically, strategic selective inbreeding. Because you're breeding animals that are related because they all have the same trait that you're trying to continue, to perpetuate in high frequency throughout the group.
Does this harken back to breeding of canines from ago? Similar.
West Virginians.
Basically anything that we have as a domesticated species has undergone this.
It's
cattle,
almost like a
horses, cats, dogs.
Microevolution almost, right? Like we're forcing evolution.
Mice and rats in the lab. I mean, you've got specific lineages of those. So yeah, it's about selective breeding. And if you look at dogs now, like the whole designer dog craze, which is really just mutts, but you do the golden retriever to the poodle and you get the golden doodle. and they tell you can't breed two golden doodles together because those won't look the same as a golden retriever to a poodle. Well, it's not entirely true. You know, if you breed two golden doodles together, half of them statistically will look pretty much like the parents do because that's that bell curve distribution.
Sure.
Right.
But then going outward from there, you'll get some that favor more of the poodle parent and some that favor, or poodle grandparent, and some that favor more of the golden retriever. But if you just keep breeding that 50% in the middle that all look the same, then it eventually reaches the point where those outlier ones that look more poodle or more golden retriever, those genes get culled out of the mix, and you're just keeping that tight phenotype for the golden doodle phenotype. And that's how every dog breed has come about, is, you know,
kind of been invented essentially.
Yeah, they find the traits that they want, and they only breed the puppies that they have raised up that have those traits together. And any of the puppies that don't have those traits, they get cut out of the breeding pool. So you're not perpetuating the genes that you don't want.
So a word you used there that was very maybe pertinent to this conversation is lineage, because we're not necessarily looking at different species. Lineage becomes important in this, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to follow up the definition, it's a question of, and I'm sure there's wiggle room with this, but depending on who you ask. But at what point is a line a line? Like, where do you draw the line that a line is a line?
That's a great question.
It would be at a point where you have stable passage of that trait or traits that you're looking for. So if you are trying to breed a striped morph or a banded morph or something, it's a line when you breed it and all of your offspring are coming out striped. Or all of your offspring are coming out banded, and you're not getting, you know, just a smattering of different things, half banded, half striped, whatever. So it's that sustained, stable perpetuation of traits per generation.
So what in the reptile hobby, and this is good on this question, what gives me the right to say, and this may not be an answerable question, to say that I have a line of anything? You know what I mean? You know, we have this. We could really look at this deeply in other species, specifically Leonis, Mex-Mex, stuff like that, where you have these lines of animals because they're not morphs, they're not actual genetic anomalies, they're not recessive or codom or what we would look at in Mendelian genetics, but they've been line bred to the point of this is a Bloody line pinner on a Leonis, or this is a Shores line ultra granite, or, you know. So what gives us the right, or the I hate to say the word the right, but when do I get to say this is a pain shop line anery? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, there's a couple different factors here. So the way the hobbyists use line isn't always necessarily directly in dealing with line breeding.
Okay.
Like if you go out tomorrow and you find an anery corn, you know, if Justin goes out tomorrow and there's an anery corn that's just sitting out on his back porch,
that would be awesome.
And he brings that in, you know, anery is a stable Mendelian phenotype, genotype, you know, but Justin could call that the Palmetto Coast anery, and it would be the Palmetto Coast lineage anery because it's a proven genetic factor, and he breeds it out, you know, the way it is. Flip side, Justin goes out and finds, you know, this polka dot animal, and he brings it in, and then later in the week, Jake comes by and he's like, "Hey man, I found this polka dot animal." And Justin's like, "Well, I got a polka dot animal too." And then they breed them together when they get to be old enough, and half the babies are polka dot and the other half the babies just look like normals. And they keep the polka dots and they move the normals off to the side. And then they breed, polka dots, and now 70% of the babies are polka dot and 30 are normals, and you shove the normals off to the side and you breed the polka dots again, and now you've got 85% are polka dots and 15 are normals, and you shove them off. And eventually you're going to reach the point where whenever you breed polka dots, all you're getting are polka dots.
Okay.
And at that point, it's the longleaf palmetto polka dot line.
So to kind of take a step back and simplify this for me, you used a specific terminology there. You said genotype, and you also said phenotype.
Yes.
What's the difference in those two things?
So a genotype is what exact genes the animal is carrying.
Okay.
A phenotype is just how the animal looks. And phenotype is dependent on genotype, but it's not necessarily a one-to-one in all cases.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. With anery, the genotype and the phenotype are tied one-to-one. If I have the anery gene and both copies of it because it's recessive, then my phenotype is anery.
Okay.
If I'm het anery, that's a heterozygous genotype, my phenotype is going to be normal because it's a recessive trait.
Okay.
Now, if I have something, I don't know of any real line-bred traits in corns. I'm sure they have them. I'm not big in corns. Sure. But if we look at carpet pythons, the tiger.
Mm-hmm.
Tiger is a polygenic trait. So it's not just one gene that gives it that. But you breed striped tigers together and you get more striped tigers.
Okay.
Now, I can breed a really strongly striped tiger to a normal coastal, and some of the babies will be a little bit striped. Some of them won't be. Those sort of striped ones, it's not really right to call them tigers because they don't have that full phenotypic expression, but they're still carrying genes that contribute to the tiger phenotype. So then if I take some of those stripy ones later and breed them down the line and get full striped tigers out of them again, it is okay to call those full striped tigers because that's what they are. They've got that tiger phenotype. So the phenotype defines the morph there rather than the genotype defining the morph.
So are these phenotypes, and this gets directly into line breeding, are these phenotypes solvable through any kind of Mendelian genetics?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So ultimately, everything comes down to genetics.
Okay.
It's just a lot of people have a hard time coming to grips with the fact that, if I say it takes 9 genes to contribute to make a phenotype, any one of those genes or combination of those genes less than 9 won't give you the exact phenotype. You have to have all of them together. But some of those genes, like if 3 of the 9 genes are recessive, I've got to have the recessive pairings of those with the other 6 genes. If they're only hets of those 3 genes, you're not going to get that full phenotype.
Mm-hmm.
But you may still express some version of that phenotype.
You may still express some version of that phenotype, which is, again, why I said, I can take a really nice tiger and breed it to a normal coastal, and I'll get some babies that are still striped, but they're not that full tiger stripe. That's because some of the genes that contribute to tiger have a dominant expression.
Okay.
But without having all of those genes together to give that perfect, nice, clean, solid, bald back, striped from head to toe or head to tail, it's not really a true tiger. Even if it's got, like I said, you can think of it if half of them are incomplete dominant and half of them are recessive, or half of them are dominant and half of them are recessive. If I breed a tiger to a normal, those babies that have some of the striping, they have all of the genetic potential
Okay.
In like a heterozygous form, it's just not in a homozygous form. That's why you have to breed them to another animal that also carries those same genes.
So now we're
and
not
get
looking
that
at
full
just
combination out.
one genetic pair. We're looking at potentially many.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll directly relate this to a corn-like animal. We'll talk about emery-eye rat snakes in the Nueces lineage of Mealmorum. That's going to be Pantherophis emery-eye Mealmorum. They found many years ago here in Nueces County a reverse stripe animal that was perfect. I've seen pictures of it. This thing is, you'll look at it, there's no question. This thing is railroad stripes, perfect. They bred that animal in, and now I believe, a few buddies of mine and even me myself, we've got down to like F3s. None of them have ever been as good as Dad, right? And now he did pass away. You know what? I'm not even going to say that he did. I don't actually know the complete lineage. I'm sure he may still be out there somewhere, but we're still breeding back and taking wild animals, and even in the first generation, we see anomalies, we see aberrancies, right? You can even in F1s, from that completely striped animal, reverse striped animal, to a wild caught, we saw relatively reverse striped snakes. But as they've started kind of breeding those back together, and again, we're on to I think F3s now. We're just now getting animals that are close.
Yeah.
So is that kind of that same what's going on?
Yeah. I mean, it's perhaps an easier way to think of it is basically when you're dealing with polygenetic animals, what you're dealing with is, like triple or quad or quint visual animals.
Okay.
So if you think of it that way, they're not specific discrete traits, but it has to line up the same way. So that original reverse stripe animal, say it's 5 genes that contribute to that.
Okay.
And you breed it to a wild type. Now all of the babies are quint het reverse stripe.
Okay.
So now if you breed those together, that's 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So you got a 1 in 32 chance out of hatching an exact replica of Dad again.
Yeah.
Which isn't exactly the greatest odds.
Right.
And that's assuming all 5 of those genes are incomplete dominant.
That's also assuming that it's only 5.
Right. I just grabbed 5 because it's a real easy, 2, 4, 6, 8. Yeah.
But even then, we could be playing with genetics that look like 100 individual. And I'm being egregious in my number, but 100 different recessive or
right
things, because a genome on a I guess the visual, what we see in a strand of DNA is massive. It's billions of things. If I think, I don't know. I'm not very smart.
I don't know what it is for corn snakes, but most snakes are between about 24,000 and 36,000 genes.
Okay. Wow. So even if it was 1% of that genetic makeup that made any of these things happen, we're still looking at like what, 250 to 350, something like that, right? It's a lot. It's a massive number. So it would make sense that even if we took that animal, bred it to a wild animal, and we were looking to recreate that anomaly, our chances could be extremely slim, no matter how many years we bred it, as long as we grace this earth, right?
Right.
Okay. So that, because this is good to this conversation, because we find people that find animals, specifically corn snakes in the wild, and they show a genetic trait, and we want to try to, I'm going to breed for that. The North Carolina corns that show a lot of silver, and we want to try to get that silver out of them. I want to pull that silver out, and I want to get it into my project. So I take that wild caught animal, gorgeous, beautiful silver thing, and I pair it to a albino that I know is a line bred, only has albino in its loins as far as a recessive trait. So I'm going to make first gen hets that are albino, and I'm going to get this silver perpetrated in the first set of babies. It's all going to be het albino, but man, I'm going to start seeing some, and then you see no silver.
Right.
And so it's fair to believe that not everything is going to be that easy. It's not just a first generation kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. See, I mentioned like lines in particular. If we're talking about corns, like the first thing that comes to mind is Abbott line stuff.
Yeah,
which does have a very sort of trademarked look to it. Like you look at a snake, and it's at least for me, and I could be completely wrong. I mean, I know there are wild corns that have, I have one myself that looks very Abbott-like, even though it's not an Abbott. But you see them at shows and stuff, and it's usually fairly easy to pick out what's got Abbott line stuff in it and what doesn't. But to anyone else, it would look sort of like just a really high contrast normal.
Sure.
So I guess sort of the question with that is like, that's when the whole question of at what point is a line a line? And I know Abbott's probably been working on that for God knows how many years.
Yeah.
But it's like he got, even though it's still like a normal phenotypically.
Yeah.
He still did enough to get it to stand out. So I guess that's sort of like the thing for me, like with the line thing is like, at what point can you say that is its own thing? But I guess if you're replicating that look, like Travis was saying, then you've pretty much you're there.
Once you have that repeatability, I can sit here and say that this pairing is going to produce animals that look like this, even if the parents may not necessarily be phenotypically that, right? I could sit there and say, hey, this happens a lot, and we're going to be jumping between species on this. Gargoyle geckos. I breed a ton of gargoyle geckos. I have a lot of bacon line stuff. I have what are known as low expression South Texas geckos bacon lines. If you looked at them, you wouldn't be like, oh, that's a bacon line for sure. But I have babies that come out that are so saturated with red that you think there's something wrong with them, right? But they're from that same lineage that produced the original bacon animal that people still use as their screensaver, even though they never saw that animal in their entire life.
Well, it's because the parents carry those genes. An interesting way to think about it, think about peacocks. Okay.
I think about them all the
time. Don't we all?
I mean, for sure.
Obviously, there's a genetic factor that contributes to the males having those gigantic tails. But the males don't just get the genes for those gigantic tails from their father. They get it from their mother, too. So the female carries the genes that contribute to the size of a male's tail, even though the female peahen doesn't have a large tail.
Okay.
So you can have, if you've got a breeding colony of peacocks, you can have one male that you're putting to 4 different females. Okay. And you notice that one of those females produces males with tails that are significantly longer than the other 3 females, even though all 3 females look the same. And they don't have spectacular tails or anything. Those females carry the genes. So it's the same thing like with your bacon line animals. Sure. Just because you don't see it in the animal doesn't mean the genes aren't there.
Yeah.
And that's where the lineage factor becomes important. If I know that these animals came from the bacon line and they carry these bacon genes, and I use them to produce babies that then produce bacon-like babies, it's bacon lineage.
Sure. Okay.
Now, it's a little different from Justin's thing about Abbott, because like he said, those are normal corns. Well, they're not normal corns. I mean, yeah, they're
an exaggerated version of...
Right. They're exceptional normals, but like nobody's going to look at that and be like, oh, yeah, that's just a normal corn.
I could go and find that.
That comes back to, I'm very fond of saying collections are genetic.
Sure.
Everybody has their own eye for what they like. And so in even a slightly subconscious manner, we all pick and choose animals that drift towards the things that we really like to see in our collection. And you're accumulating genes that contribute to that over time in your collection. So all of your animals start to have this kind of signature look to them. This is where you see this in carpet pythons, like, M pens.
Yeah.
Like, you will hear all the time, people can look at a snake and be like, that came from Pinnell. Sure. Because, Pinnell picked these animals that he liked, and over time, just slowly, the genes that he really liked kind of accrued into this classic M pen look. So that's the M pen line. Now, was he doing that on purpose? Probably not. But it's there now. Mm-hmm. And so everybody kind of just inadvertently, he created his own line of coastal carpets. Or of popwind carpets, or whatever it is that Mike works with. I can't remember.
So let's say we take our, and again, we're going to talk about this Abbott line of Okidi corn snakes. Let's say there's 30 years of breeding put into this. That's 10 generations. Let's call it somewhere between 8 and 10 generations. They've become so saturated in this heavy, thick black border, right? Maybe it's 14 genes at play that make that specific thing happen in our massive line of possible genetics that are being expressed. So that would make sense when I take I go to a show, I find a pretty little anery female that just looks kind of what we would consider in the hobby a normal looking anery, and I breed her to a heavily black, saturated, gorgeous Abbott line Okidi, and I get babies that have those thick, dark borders. I know they're going to be gorgeous, and I keep the best ones back, right? How many times do we say when we get a clutch, oh, these are really pretty. Man, look at this baby, right? And we do that every clutch. Every one of us does that. And we pick the best ones and we hold them back. Now I breed those two. Now I would assume that some of the aneries, now again, like you said, it's not going to be every single one of them, but they're going to carry on that thick, saturated, deep black border into even my first generation of my collection of genotypic aneries, right?
Yes.
Okay. Makes sense. Okay. All right. Huh. So it's a little more than it kind of seems from looking at it from the outside.
Yeah.
I think so, like in terms of like my Ladies Island stuff, like long term I want to see sort of what happens there. And this sort of ties into like the outcrossing thing I wanted to get into too. Like at some point outcrossing pretty much has to happen, right? Whether it's near future, way down the line, like before you start seeing genetic depression.
Actually, I think stopping right there is there's a good question. When in the average species of snakes do you think inbreeding depression happens?
So there is no hard fast.
Tell us everything.
Yeah, this is the joy of genetics.
Man with all the answers.
Again, we're going back to dealing anywhere between 24 and 36,000 genes. Okay.
Sure.
Is it possible that in the two original animals that you pick for your project, that neither of those animals has any kind of detrimental gene in it? Yes, that's possible. Extremely, extremely tiny odds, but it's possible. If you manage to hit those nearly impossible odds, then in theory you could inbreed those animals in perpetuity and never have a problem. Okay. Realistically, that's not going to happen. Every animal has some kind of mutation to its genome. That's just the nature of DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, if you're inbreeding, basically what you're doing is you are creating homogeneity across the genome. So all of the genes, all of the allele pairs are the same. And even genes that by themselves are very weakly detrimental and can be overcome if it's just that one gene pair,
okay,
when paired up, with 2 or 4 or 10 or 12 or 20 other slightly detrimental genes, you eventually hit a crash down point. Again, there's no hard set rule for when that can happen. Most people will kind of agree that after about 4 to 6 generations of inbreeding is where you start to see that accumulation.
Mm-hmm.
And at about 10 is where you start to see very drastic effects happen. But again, it's not hard and fast. You may have a pair of animals that just have some really bad genetics, and in 3 generations of inbreeding, you've hit that wall of just everything is going wrong with your animals. You may have animals that you got really lucky and you get out to 10 animals, 10 generations, and that's when you just start seeing some things, but it's nothing major until you hit 12 to 15 generations.
Sure. So this is also going to be species specific, I believe. Some of your like Alterna or some of these animals that have these tiny little populations, it's thought to be that you literally, this is hobby talk, right? You can't inbreed them enough, right? Like you have your Boy Scout road animals that's only found on that animal. But then again, how many generations have we gone down into that? How many people are on F5, F6, F7? Pairing babies.
Right, and also, those people. I mean, yeah, it's a bitch to find Alterna, but still, those people who are into it, they still go out and they do it. So
exactly.
I've got some black gap animals, and I really like my black gaps. It's not like my black gap animals are 12 generations deep and they've never had any black gap brought back into them. Mm-hmm. I got my animals from a guy who got his animals from a guy who got his animals from a guy, but along the line, my guy also went out and caught some wild caught black gaps and bred them into his collection. So mine are black gaps, but they're not 7 or 8 generations deep black gap because they've had infusions of black gap in them as well. It's
and
not
black
just
gaps
pure on top.
Yeah.
But then going along with that, that hyper fragmented nature of the Alternamorph or the Alterna localities is they've already kind of gone through this, what we call a bottleneck effect or a founder's effect. Because these populations are segregated from each other and very localized, a lot of the inbreeding and deleterious genes that you have to worry about have just been purged out through the natural course of things. Because conditions out there are hard as hell. The babies that have got bad genes, they're not making it, and so those genes are getting purged out rapidly, and there's high turnover of those bad genes until they essentially just get washed out of the population. You see this same thing with crested geckos.
That makes sense.
Crested geckos have been bred in, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that crested geckos are 80% genetically identical to one another across the entire hobby. There's 10 millions of the little bastards because they had a very small recovery population from this bottleneck event that they went through in nature. Rough scale pythons, same type of thing. Their geographic area is so small that inbreeding has happened to them naturally, and they have naturally purged those deleterious genes out. So those are those cases where, like I said, is it rare that you get a population of animals where there's nothing deleterious in them? Yeah. But they do happen and they do occur, and those populations where they've already been through it naturally are great case studies of it.
So would you eventually, though, see like a second wave of that kind of thing at some point?
Yes, you probably
would it be
will,
like a
because
merry-go-round where eventually something's gonna come back around that gets mixed in and then gets continued to be
yeah, I
into
mean, you will see that, because even over, just the nature of DNA over time, new mutations will pop up. And with those new mutations popping up, if you've got closed groups, then you start to enrich for them, and and some of those are going to be problematic. And so, with DNA, it's 1 in every million to every 10 million bases gets translated wrong. So, in along the lines there, you're going to start getting
something's
little
gonna
blips
happen.
that pop up.
Yeah.
So on question with corns in a similar situation, Justin works with some animals that are insular, right? These are populations that are found on islands. Those are very small islands. I did a little Google foo and looked at just Ladies Island. This is a massive island. Are these little micro habitats? I've got to assume as a corn snake, you're not high up on the predatory scale. I'm sure there's like an actual term for that, but you're not high up on the food chain. Sorry, there is a thing for that. Coined it here first. Food chain. Go ahead, guys. Hit me up. Email for the NFT. Food chain. Just came up with that. But let's assume that these little insular snake, and they have their own phenotype. They're a little different looking. They're a little more specific. Are those animals going to be a little more resilient to that, right? Like not a lot of those babies survive. I bet out of a clutch of 10 in the wild.
Seattle, it's a little different though, because we're talking about islands that are very close to one another. We're talking about small creeks and small rivers that are separating them. We're talking like a couple hundred yards at the shortest.
And that was what I was going to say is,
it's not like Biak, with chondros. That's considerably different, and not a volcanic island or a volcanic island. That was never part of actual mainland Papua. It is like its own thing. It's not like that down here. There still can be some travel between islands and things like that. Whether it's they're crossing some of these rivers and stuff. And it's salt water, so it's very high salinity salt water at that. But take that for what you will. But you also have like land gets cleared, wood gets thrown into the back of these giant like FEMA trucks, and then taken to one of these islands and dumped. And for all you know,
so there could be transport.
There's a
there
lot
could be
of
things.
Loose sort of. There's a lot of room for drift and things like that.
There's a lot of genetic exchange still happening there. So
all right,
it's those island populations that Justin is dealing with are not truly insular in the same way, like he said, like Biak would be, or the
Solomon
Hog Island boas would be, or things like that.
Or even going back and looking at our Alterna, where they're in a mountain range.
Yeah,
and there's between Black Gap and I guess the closest thing, the Christmas Mountains or River Road or something in that kind of southern region. It's not even close, right? And they're not going to make it that far because of infinite amount of predators, whatever. Even
and just horrible conditions in between them. Yeah.
Yeah. It also turns out it's literally unbearable. Yeah. Interesting. Wow, it's a lot to think about. Yeah,
long term with those though, especially since I know I've more than a pair. I've the 2.2, and I'm sure I'll end up coming across more smaller ones that I want to add into at some point too. But
so let's continue talking about this. Locality and line breeding. Let's say Justin takes his 2 Lady Island, and we're going to just focus on that one little spot where you get them pair. In the F1s, maybe we don't see anything too spectacular, but we take an F1 and either take it back to a wild caught or take those F1s and bring them together, and we start seeing what we would consider a genetic anomaly. Whether, obviously, it's not going to be an inherently recessive trait. It's not going to be simple Mendelian genetics. We're not going to be like, oh, boom, there's an anery, right?
Mandalorian genetics.
Mandalorian genetics. This is the way. But let's say we start seeing some connected saddling on our saddles on these corns, and he continues to breed towards that. My kind of question, and this is more of I think I have an answer, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. When is that no longer Ladies Island locality? When do we lose that locality?
When do you lose your Irish ancestry?
If all of the animals that you've contributed to it are the Ladies Island, then it's still all Ladies Island locality.
Okay, so even
it's
we're
just
F5
Ladies
or F6,
Island locality Saddleback.
Okay.
Because they've got that interesting Saddleback mutation or phenotype that you have selected for over time. But if none of the animals that have gone into that project are anything other than Ladies Island, then it's still Ladies Island perpetually.
So as long as we're using Okatee line animals and we're breeding them, they are still Okatee animals. They're still Lady Island. We still get to maintain our locality nomenclature on that.
Yes.
Okay.
And like Black Gap is a real good example of that.
Sure.
Black Gap has probably got one of the most diverse phenotypic, array of all of the Alternas, because you got those really nice saddles that have got the black alternation lines in between them in the gray, and then you've got the patternless ones.
Sure.
And then you have the true Alternaphase that basically have no yellow or no orange in them, but they're just black, gray, black, gray, black, gray. And then you've got the bullseye ones where they're, the Blair's banding has got that and it's discrete bullseyes down. All of those are black gaps. And, nobody thinks to say that, well, because it's a bullseye, it's not a black gap, or because it's patternless, it's not a black gap. It's just a patternless black gap or a bullseye black gap.
I'm an absolute Alterna nut, and I found my first Alterna last year. There's also been 10 animals found actually on black gap, right? Like there's like one good cut, the headquarters cut, and then or not headquarters cut. Yeah, I think it's headquarters cut. But there's not a lot. Our sample size is also tiny. Right on any of these,
it's pretty small. I think there are a few more because
there may be more, and I'm picking a number, but it's not a lot. Yeah.
No, it's not. It's not. I want to say it might be as many as 20 odd.
Okay. Yeah.
Over time, but even then, that's not a lot.
Yeah. It's very similar to the Boy Scout road animals too. That's which is going to be shooting towards the northern edge of that range. And I'm sorry that we're kind of talking about Alterna, but this is all.
We're talking about. Justin said, we're going to be kind of bouncing all over because line breeding is something that's throughout the hobby.
Boy Scout road animals have a very specific, very brown, this weird saturation in the orange. You don't get a lot of orange in the banding. These weird little things happen on Boy Scout road, and again, small sample size. Not a lot have been found. There's one cut on Boy Scout road. Everything's been found by road cruising, which bless Texas as much as we can, but road cruising is illegal here. We can't even do that. So how many people have found them and let them mosey on their way, or it's interesting. But we're a little more relieved on corns, but that's not completely true because there's a lot of areas and phenotypes and localities of corns where we can't collect. There's pine barrens. There's Georgia animals. There's phenotypes that we don't even know what they genetically hold. That could be a huge line breeding probability, a selective breeding probability. So.
Well, that was something too I meant to bring up earlier. Was there's the new South Carolina legislation that they haven't. Well, that actually it's in effect. Where you can't sell wild, you can't sell wild caught corns that are less than 21 inches. Morphs are fine, but smaller stuff like that, anything above that you can't sell it. So it's like if I breed my Ladies Island stuff and I'm into, let's say, like F3s, couldn't I technically at that point be like, these are selectively bred, they're not wild caught animals? Is there, I guess that's sort of the main thing behind, at what point can you say a line is a line? And I'm sure in the eyes of the law and SCDNR, they're probably like, dude, they're normals. These are clearly not.
They're just corns. Yeah.
But you look at like an Abbott or any of that stuff, and they're it's anybody who works out in the field long enough can tell you, like, they can look at an Abbott and say, okay, that's not what we see normally. That's not typical.
Yeah. There's also the Sherman line, which is very similar in that line breeding idea. But I can probably guess that a lot of these animals that were collected in the Ocoee Hunt Club area, which was for, I believe, a small period of time, and I don't think you can actually collect on that land anymore.
Probably not. Everything's privately owned now.
Yeah. I mean, what's to say that as I'm building my line, they are Okeeties. Am I not grabbing from, Howie Sherman produces this banger? Lee Abbott's got this other animal, and obviously they're not here to tell you how that genealogy, the lineage, right? Boom, there's that word, lineage. They don't necessarily
that's the thing, is like, I have those absolute just insane Jasper counties from Dan Parker that are selectively bred, like line bred Jaspers. And they're the like I was saying, the exaggerated, like, extreme version of what you would find in the wild, but they're still, the line between them and those original animals isn't that long. But they're very clearly not something you would find out. Like, if I went and saw a baby corn like that in the wild, I would be blown away. But you'd never. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's tough to sort of navigate. And I'm sure whatever, like, legality wise, they're not going to care. They're like, dude, this isn't an albino, this isn't an anery, this isn't any of that. It's just it's a damn corn snake.
So we have this little anomaly. I'll go on a little rant with this, that happens in corn snakes, that we have actually taken some of these localities and started calling them phases. We don't really see this in other animals that I've noticed. But you'll have people that in their own private collections through breeding will create their own Okeee phase, or will create their own Miami phase. Those are the two that get thrown out around all the time. Now, their lineage may not tie us directly to Miami or Okeee or Jasper County or Dade County. I'm sorry, it might not be Dade County. I don't know Florida.
Okeee and normal has become almost synonymous, and me and Jake talked about that at one point, where it's like there is a very big difference between a normal and the Okeee stuff.
Like, so I almost say that rides on our shoulders to kind of tell people, we've got Walter Smith's collection. Walter Smith's collection goes out to a bunch of people like JT over at Silent Hill, a huge shout out, great animals, produces Miami phase. All kinds of different morphs. We have caramels, honeys, cinders, normals, right? We have normals that are perpetrating this look, and we still call them, these are Miamis. These are Miamis. And it's textbook what a Miami would be. But how derivative of Miami are they? And if I found an animal in Miami, I'm downtown at the club, I'm hitting it with my boys, maybe I got some tequila in me, I walk outside, boom, there's a corn snake. Is that corn snake going to look at the line breeding that we've done and say, oh shit, this doesn't even look like a Miami phase, right? Where do we go with that?
Well, how would that differ from like the Blair's phase in Alterna? I mean, that's very clearly different from the other stuff. And like the Miami phase corns, when I think of Miami phase, I'm thinking like
this
burgundy saddles, silver body.
Yeah.
Like that's what comes to mind for me. And I mean, that's something that's always been my impersonation or my interpretation of Miami phase, just from when I was going back to a kid, because my dad loved Miami phase stuff when we were doing that. Like that was his thing, was like those silver animals with those just burgundy, like deep red saddles. Yeah. That was his thing. And so anytime I think Miami, like that's what I think of.
That's it. You have that phenotype ingrained in you. That's what it looks like, right? And we all we can close our eyes and say, and Dr. Wyman, this may not, you may not close your eyes and say Miami and think of the same snake as me, and that's fine. But there, we have it ingrained what a Miami phase and an Okeee phase. So are we correct in assuming that lineage goes back to those localities, or are we correct in thinking that is just a phase at that point?
So in this case, again, this is
we're hitting you with the hard questions. You thought CornStars was going to be easy.
This is again, this comes into the sort of wibbly wobbly nature of how the hobby works. Phase in this case, we're using merely to mean phenotype.
Right.
So, like, I could have a Miami phase animal. What I'm really saying is it's a Miami phenotype. That does not make it Miami lineage, because I can derive that phenotype from animals that, were nowhere near Miami, simply through selective breeding for the traits that make it look like a Miami.
Which I will say, like, those Miamis do exist in the wild. But at the same time, like, I've seen some of the pictures of the ones that Phil has found, being in Miami, and they don't look anything like that. They're not that gray, that gray animal with the, the red saddles. Like, they're very much overall, they almost look more like the Keys stuff than anything else.
Yeah.
Well, and as you would expect them kind of to, of course they would look like Keys animals. We're talking a short distance in range.
But it's a similar thing with the Alterna, though, because you have the Blair's phase Alterna, and then you have the other stuff, and you have the different varieties of even the black gap stuff like you guys were talking about. So I think it's a very similar scenario in that case.
Alterna, man, they'll get you though, because you can have a 277 animal that is quintessential textbook Blair's phase. I mean, it is a Blair's phase animal. There's no massive orange saddles, deep dark border.
True Alterna.
True Blair dye, which
true
I think
Blair dye, yeah.
True Blair dye. And then you could have a 277 animal with a solid black head and no orange on it at all. Looks like a Hueco. I mean,
and you can breed two of those Blair's animals.
And you ain't gonna
end up getting a whole bunch of alternatives out of them.
That was always my biggest confusion with those when my dad was breeding those, was like, he gets these animals that, I mean, aside from like the Christmas Mountain stuff, which to me, I don't know if I'm wrong in thinking that those do have a very particular look that sort of makes them stand out from other stuff. Like the ones that you got from me. But then he'd have like black gap stuff, and it would have no orange on it, and then he'd get another animal that was a black gap, and it'd have plenty of that.
Yeah.
If I'm recalling correctly, and I'm like,
I mean,
how do you even decipher
gaps
these?
do that too.
Yeah.
And again, in that case, it's the Blair's phase and the Alterna phase are describing a phenotype. It's not necessarily a locality type. The black gap is the locality type, or the 277 is the locality type.
Yeah.
But the phenotype is, Alterna have basically two phenotypes. They have the Blair's phase, which is that nice, just solid switching between orange, gray, orange, gray, orange, gray. Or they have the Alterna phenotype, which is just the gray with black striping, gray with black striping. And
I find it interesting because you have stuff like chondros where like you can see an animal and you can have a pretty decent idea of what part of the range that it came from.
Yeah,
like there are. It's not with some stuff. It's not easy, especially when you get into the stuff that's more close to one another. But like and maybe I'm sure I just don't have the eye for it with Alterna. But you have those guys that can look at something to tell you. They see the minute details and stuff, and they're able to tell you these things. But like, it's just surprising that it's not as easy with other stuff as it is with like chondros and some of the other that are more obvious.
I think we find a little bit more. If you showed me a corn snake, right, I could probably guess what region it was from. Alterna, man, I bred that wild caught male 3 mile to an F1 female 3 mile last year, and dude, I have from almost no orange at all Alterna phase to deep Blair's phase out of the same clutch, right? Yeah. Like they're so diverse. But if I took that F1 and I bred it to another F1, or I guess that'd be a F1.5, that's a totally another discussion when what a wild cut to an F1 is called, and I don't think it matters. But we could keep breeding 3 mile animals into the F3, F4 generation where they have literally zero color, and we could breed these animals to where they're such saturated blairs they look like these long blotch animals.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then again, I'm going to keep the prettiest ones. You're never going to see them, right? So I'm going to keep the ones that I think fit my ideology of what those animals should look like. But we'll do the same thing with corns. It's maybe that species a lot more variable than a corn. Maybe a corn. So actually, this is a great question. If you took a corn snake from the Pine Barrens and you took a corn snake from the Keys, though some of the coloration may be a little different, most of the patterning is the same. Dr. Wyman, I would ask you, is there a reason that happens over a 1,700-mile spread south to north when we have another species of colubrid that's, 20 miles away is so, you take something from the Huecos over, I guess that would be northwest of El Paso, and then you go to the Davis Mountains, which is just a couple hours away, and you couldn't pick two snakes that look the same. You know what I mean? They're so
to
different.
Me, that seems almost more like a speckled rattlesnake scenario where it's more like the environment has dictated more of that than anything else.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. That's the environmental pressure selecting for your phenotypes. The animals that survive are the ones that best fit the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The Pine Barrens down to Miami is you're thinking, well, that's completely different, environments, but really when you think about it, it's not. It's, the East Coast is kind of just one environment. It's warmer versus colder, but it's still kind of just one environment. It's that smattered deciduous, broken up by open field land. And that's how these guys get by, is they're kind of transitional animals. They can go between those two environments, and a lot of times they live right on that borderland between them. And that's why they've got that blotching, is because that blotching is a natural camouflaging that helps break up the pattern in a very similar way to the light dark shadows that you get right on the transitions between open areas and forested areas. So you've got that whole open forested area running up and down the coast. So that's why they've got that same pattern there, versus out west and Texas, where it's like the difference between the environments, even 20 miles apart, is so radically different that you won't have the same pattern, because if you had the exact same pattern in the two different places, one of them's going to stick out like a sore thumb.
And having gone out there and seen the variety of habitat and stuff, it makes complete sense. You look at like the pink coach whips that they have out there in Southwest Texas, and then you see the pink ass rocks they have there, and it's like, okay, it makes complete sense now. Like curled up in a pile of rocks with a bunch of these like random sort of reddish pink ones around the the area too. Like it makes sense.
Yeah, and then you get the ones that are like half pink, half black.
Mm-hmm.
And like you see that snake by itself, and you're like, what the fuck could make that happen? But then you actually see those areas, and half the stone is pink because it's in the shade, but where it's getting exposed to that full sun, the photo reaction is causing that stone to turn black. And so you get these animals that are half pink, half black, so that they blend in with that weird half pink, half black environment.
And I guess that would also
copperheads. Yeah. Put copperheads and leaves; they're invisible. You put them on a black top, they stick out like a sore thumb.
But look at copperheads. Well, let's say the Trans-Pecos copperhead caligaster and Trans-Pecos rat snake subox. You take them from Boy Scout Road, which is going to be towards their northern, and I keep saying Boy Scout Road, this is going to be up towards Iran, which is actually a little bit more east, but north of the West Texas. Take them all the way down to Black Gap, all the way down to the border. These animals look almost identical. There will be some color variation, sure, but you have animals that look damn near identical.
No coincidence.
And it's like, well, why didn't these animals do the same thing that Lepidus or Alterna or
Because they're inhabiting different environments, different
microenvironments,
different nippers within those environments. The ones that they're in are more stably consistent. So that's why their phenotype isn't changing drastically across that range.
I think
so. That's why in North Carolina,
specs are the perfect example of that.
What's that?
I think specs are like the perfect example of that, because you see specs in an area where there's pink rock, and those specs are pink. You see them in areas where there's white rock; those things are white. Like
this would also kind of make sense how we have Pantherophis across the board. You have black rats in North Carolina and yellow rats in South Carolina. In these same areas, you have guttatus. These are in the same Pantherophis complex, but maybe they're inhabiting different micro environments within those, or fitting different niches, and that's why they're so different, even though they fit within that same complex.
Yes.
Interesting. Gentlemen, I'm going to step aside for 1 second. I'll be right back.
Sure. I'm going to ask Travis a really dumb question. So, I mean, at what point should we outcross, and with what should it be done with? I mean, normals of a different line, or normals, different line of the same morph. Like, what's if I so like? Well, I guess we'll use my locality stuff as an example. Like, if I was going to outcross that to something, would I be better off doing something that's more close to like gene wise a normal versus something like maybe a normal that's like a tessera? Or I'm having a hard time explaining this question without sounding like a complete idiot. I don't know. Ask and answer my question, Travis.
Okay, so you want to know at what point outcrossing becomes necessary?
Like when in snakes in particular, and I guess this could be really anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be corns, but
well, it's with anything in particular. Yeah. And there's a lot of ways you can answer it. The first way I would answer it would be you absolutely need to outcross the instant you start to see any kind of inbreeding depression going on. That should just be a kind of a common sense type of thing. Mm-hmm. If you're noticing problems happening because your colony is closed, you need to get new blood in there, because by that point, you've essentially already created a toxic genetic pool, and you need to clean it out. Mm-hmm. But you don't have to wait that long. So you can start outcrossing at any point in time to help keep those bloodlines refreshed and fresh. If you're doing that outcrossing, again, probably subconsciously, but you can do it consciously. You know, if you've got a specific look you're going for, then pick animals that are not genetically related but still have that same look.
Okay. That's kind of what I was getting at. That's
while it's not necessarily the same genes. Mm-hmm. One, there's a chance that it is, and two, it's a chance that they're genes that are compatible, so you'll still end up getting that same look.
Because the way I look at outcrossing, so it's almost like, I guess, stitching in a way. So like you have like your straight line, and then you would sort of go out and then come back in, and then go out and come back in. And is that accurate? I don't know how to talk. It's very clear in my brain.
I know what you're saying, and this is going to be easier for me to draw.
I didn't take my medicine before I started. It makes it a lot easier to concentrate and get these thoughts out.
So, if you look at your inbreeding going, you're kind of going like this, and you're tightening down.
Right.
As you go. Mm-hmm. What outcrossing does is you bring something new in, which increases this diversity. then again, you're going to start to come down. So you bring something new in, which bolsters your diversity, and then you start decreasing again.
So it's like, it doesn't matter how long I've line bred something. I've got 10 generations in. If I outcross it, I'm still 50% those 10 generations combined.
Yes.
Okay. So here's a good one. Why in corn snakes, this may not be a question you plan on answering.
Where do babies come from?
If I take a daddy corn snake, right, and he has the hemipenes and so why in corn snakes do I have 30,000 different morphs, and then in crested geckos, I have 2, and these animals are just as fecunded. These animals are bred on accident more than any 2 animals on this planet, I'm guessing, other than humans, and dogs, and probably cats. Fuck cats. But why? I have a bunch of recessive mutations in corns. It's proven that the recessive, some of them we found are not necessarily just recessive. Ball pythons. I have a whole bunch of codom. I believe that's the right term. Don't get mad at me. I literally don't know. I've never touched a ball python in my life. I have never.
Codominant is not a thing.
Codom is not a thing. Okay. I've never held a ball python. I don't actually know what a ball python feels like. Crested geckos. I know people that produce hundreds and hundreds. I know people that produce them in the thousands, and we don't have any albinos. Why? Is that a thing? Is that an answerable question?
I think it starts out with your initial group. No.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of that whole bottleneck purge factor.
Okay.
My guess would be that whatever made it through that bottleneck, none of them carried the gene for albino.
Okay.
And we just haven't, when Justin brought up the whole, that merry-go-round where everything comes back around, we haven't had them in captivity long enough where the freak mutation occurs that albino pops up.
Well, here's an interesting...
It will happen eventually because, albino is just one of those mutations that happens. Like, you name an animal, and it's probably got an albino out there that's been, seen, found. Kangaroo, koala, horse, elephant, lion, leopard.
Black racers.
What?
Black racers.
Black racers.
Well, obviously, Travis, this is something you're intimate with. Alterna. There's an albino Alterna, right?
There is not an albino Alterna.
I know. That's a whole other. If anybody knows what we're talking about,
yes.
Hey, huge shout out to the guy.
There's an albino Rutheni.
You can go fuck yourself. Yeah, no, that's completely impossible. You don't get to take a leucistic and breed it to a het leucistic and get albinos. That's not how that works in first generation. And then produce 4 albinos or some shit.
4 albinos.
Are you sure?
I've done math. It's actually something I do often, and that doesn't work. So you're just saying that I just have a bigger sample size that's not gone through that bottleneck. I can go catch a corn snake tomorrow, outcross my line, and maybe have a new morph called Wigglewomp or Zipzorb, right? Like it doesn't.
Right, because corn snakes, they're over such a huge range. They haven't had to go through this bottleneck effect where basically any deleterious gene was purged out of the population because there were so few animals left behind.
Yeah. Essentially thousands and thousands of years ago, right? Like this is something that happened through evolution.
Right. That's why you see it in ball pythons. Ball pythons cover a huge area.
Yeah.
So just over the millennia, across that area, those weird mutations pop up. They're stable. An albino in and of itself is at a selective disadvantage because an albino sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
But the hets are fine. The hets look like normals, so that gene can perpetuate and float along.
Goes
as long as there isn't some massive constriction event that means that there's only 100 ball pythons left. If there's only 100 ball pythons left in the wild, what are the odds that a het albino ended up in that pool of 100 ball pythons.
Yeah.
It's really small, but when there's 100 million ball pythons, obviously some of them out there are going to be carrying that head albino gene, and that's why it pops up.
And so tying this back into crested geckos, I think crested geckos, the island of New Caledonia, is like 7,000 square miles. It's a big island, right? But it's not a huge land mass,
right?
And there are way more crested geckos in captivity than there ever will be in the wild, by a compounded amount. It's you don't go to the very small island of New Caledonia and get off the airplane and get attacked by crested geckos. Whereas,
and they're not across that whole island either. They're only in a very small area of the island.
Yeah, that's I back on gargoyle geckos. They're so hard to find in the wild that, as far as I know, a gargoyle gecko. They're also in like nickel mining areas, which are losing land very quickly.
Oh yeah,
I don't think a
toxic
wild
crap.
Yeah, I don't think a wild gargoyle gecko has been found in a very long time. In fact, I know I've seen not necessarily documentaries, but people have gone looking for them and have not found them. And you're talking about a fucking massive lizard that sticks to bark, right? Probably hard to spot one, but still. So that's what you're calling that bottleneck event. That's the reason why we'll see more, corn snakes inhabit a very large part of the United States. As far as rat snakes go, to my knowledge, Pantherophis guttatus actually has the biggest range of any Pantherophis in North America. We would actually kind of say this in a different sense if we look at Pantherophis allegahensis in the current taxonomy. But if we actually break that down as previous taxonomy, black rats, yellow rats, Williams eye, all that. Anyways, we're not going to get into that. This is the taxonomy episode. We'll wait till we get somebody that deals with that a little more. But corn snakes have a huge range.
So yes, it's a massive range.
Okay, so we can sit here and think massive, biggest range of any Pantherophis in North America. I believe probably any Pantherophis at all, right? For sure. That makes a little bit more sense. That's why we have so many morphs. These things are found in the wild. There's wild populations, Devil's Garden anneries that are known. So that kind of answers that question. I know a lot of people have asked that. Why? They've been bred. They're inbred on inbred and inbred again. I mean, if ugly was pretty, we'd call them a 10. But we just keep going. So obviously, it's a very commonly bred species. But on top of that, it's got a massive range.
Yeah.
And it's not bottlenecked by anything.
Well, think about how many morphs have come out of just locality stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like we talked about cinders. Now those came out of originated from the keys stuff, and
But look how much has come out of the keys. Your diffused, your cinders. Of course, we talked about that. They've found albinos in Georgia. They found albinos in South Carolina. They found albinos in Palmettos. Man, great thing to bring up, Justin. The palmetto morph.
Travis is over. He's like, no more.
Why do we get bug eyes on leucistic animals?
It's something that is inherently tied to the nature of the gene. So leucism deals with melanocyte migration and distribution, and the melanocytes they travel with a lot of other things, or they assist in the travel of a lot of other things. And one of those associations is what lays down what's known as the developmental cup for the eye, which is the cells that start, the formation of what develops into the eye. So if the cells there are traveling somewhat wrong, they don't lay down properly, and the eye forms weirdly because of that. So sometimes you get bug eyes because the cells just don't lay down properly the way they're supposed to.
So in that sense with palmettos, we have what I've grown to call, and maybe wrong, a visual heterozygous. Is that my correct terminology?
Sure. This is what.
Sure isn't a scientific answer.
It's not. It's not. It's not. I mean, yes and no. It's scientific. It's an incomplete dominant.
Okay.
Animal. You know, yes, it's a visible het, but it's a visible het because in the het form, it is incompletely dominant. You know, the same way that caramel in carpet pythons is incomplete dominant, the same way that lesser in ball pythons is incomplete dominant. You know, it's a gene that with one copy, there is a dominant expression. It's just not the full expression that you see when you have two copies of that gene.
It seems very common with leucism.
Yes.
Okay.
Leucism is very, very commonly seen as an incomplete dominant.
Okay. So if I have a gene, are you familiar with tessera in corn snakes?
Yeah, a little bit. It's the striped one, striped back.
It is one of the stripes, yes. So if I take a tessera animal and I breed it to a wild type, me and Justin are looking at doing that this year. I plan on getting 50% tesseras. That's
what the calculator online told me.
That's what the calculator online told me. I look at it in my Mendelian genetics, and I say one big T and one little t, because I'm guessing there's not a T there, to something else. I'm going to get 50% big T's on my Punnett square.
Mm-hmm.
If I take a tessera to another tessera,
mm-hmm.
I'm going to get 75% tesseras.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the Punnett square works. If I do that, there is an animal in that Punnett square that has two large T's.
Yes.
In the hobby, we call that super tessera. It does not have a phenotypic look different than any other tessera. Right? They all look the same. There's no
mm-hmm.
way to tell. What's going on with that?
So in that case, you're just dealing with a simple dominant gene, which means that in both the het form and the homozygous form, the phenotype is the same.
Okay.
And yeah, so you breed a heterozygous genetic tessera to a heterozygous genetic tessera, and your Punnett square says that you get a homozygous tessera, two heterozygous tessera, and then the homozygous normal.
Okay.
So big T, big T, big T, little t, big T, little t, little t, little t.
Sure.
So you get three visual tesseras. Two of them are heterozygous, one of them is homozygous.
Okay.
And that homozygous is your super tessera.
And that super tessera bred to essentially anything is going to give us 100%.
Tesseras across the board.
Yeah, 100%.
What about
now
two supers together?
100%. We're also kind of assuming that it works on that simple Mendelian scale.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a chance that it's actually happening on a bigger scale? Maybe this is 9 genes and it's 8 large T's and 1 small T, and that's why you'll occasionally get 1 or 2 normals. I thought about these questions for a while.
Yeah, well, that gets back to the line breeding thing.
Okay.
If there's 9 genes contributing to it, then if you breed a tessera animal to a normal, you're not going to get 50% tesseras and 50% normals, because you're going to get some random distribution of all of those T's, and not enough of them are going to have, well, none of them are going to have the exact combination of T's, unless all 9 of those T's are dominant.
Okay.
And then you have a 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. 1 in 512 chance of hatching out a tessera again.
Okay.
So the odds of hatching out, in a clutch of 10, the odds of hatching out 5, 1, 5, 12 animals.
Sure.
Real tiny.
So you have to have that full culmination of genes. And that's going to go back to that original conversation we had. Even though I find something under a rock that's expressing something that I think is just amazing, and I breed it into something in my collection or another wild-caught animal, and I just don't see that happen again, it may actually be a passable genetic trait.
It's just not a simple Mendelian trait, right? It's a complex trait that's going to take more breeding, and that's why, going back to Justin's question of, at what point do we outcross and what do we outcross to? I didn't fully close the loop on that, but with his Lady Island, if he's going for a specific phenotype there, if he finds other animals in the wild that have that same phenotype that he's looking for, those are the ones that he would want to bring in for his outcrossings.
Okay.
Because the reason they look like that is probably, not guaranteed, because they have those same genes involved. But they're genetically distinct animals. So if you find an animal in the wild that's got nice stripes or combined saddles, call it hourglasses. Instead of having those bullseyes, it's got weird hourglassy looking saddles. And then you've got another animal in your collection that is, cinder diffused, whatever, that also has weird hourglassing. That's the one you'd want to use versus one that's just perfectly banded. Because at least that other one, you're bringing two animals that have got that hourglass phenotype together.
In that same ballpark.
So the odds are you're bringing similar genes together, which will work with each other in that manner. It's not a guarantee, but it's a better chance that it will happen that way.
Okay. Let's hit you with the next one that's another complex. And I'm kind of just going through corn snake genetics that are inherently... There's a lot of questions about these, and this is great for any listeners that are especially first-time breeding or looking to get into this and want to know. So I'm kind of hitting you left and right with these. Ultramel. Are you familiar with the ultramel gene in corn snakes?
It's the one that's allelic to albino.
Yes. So if you take an albino and an ultra, which there are actual visual ultras, which is a hypogene that from the early 80s, may even be late 70s, and I'm not the encyclopedia on this.
Ultramel to AML gives you ultramel.
Yes. It takes one AML gene and one ultra gene, and you get an ultramel.
Yeah.
But if I take an ultramel and I breed it to an AML, I get half AMLs, half ultramels.
Right.
So the thought is it is both simple recessive, but it takes one of each. Why is it that something like that can even happen?
It's allelism. So
okay.
Duh.
Easiest way to think of alleles is like suits in a card deck. Okay. So think of your AML is the ace of hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The wild type is the ace of spades.
Okay.
And the ultra is the ace of diamonds.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if I have ace of hearts and ace of spades, my animal is going to be visually ace of spades because it's going to look like a wild type, even though it's carrying the albino allele.
Mm-hmm.
If I have ace of hearts and ace of hearts, I'm an amale animal.
Okay.
Because that's the recessive, and that expresses. If I have the ace of hearts and the ace of diamonds, I have the ultramel.
Sure.
And it looks like, more ultra than amale because the ultra is dominantly expressed over amale.
Okay.
But if I have an ultra and a wild type, the wild type, if I have the diamond and the spade is going to win out because the wild type is dominant over ultra.
Okay. So it's pretty uncommon to see any genes that work like that where they can express their own type unless it's familiar in other species, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we see it in ball pythons.
Okay.
We see it a lot in ball pythons.
Ball pythons are tough, man.
Yeah, so you've got the albino and the candy.
Okay.
Which then they give you the candino. You have, all the different variants for leucism. Mojave, mocha, butter, Rousseau, special. All of those are different leucistic gene combos. You've got the fire complex, the black-eyed Lucy's, fire, vanilla, disco, thunder.
These are fucking badass names. Why do we got like Ultra? You know what I mean? That's the coolest name we got. We're like Cinder and Sunkissed. You're just over here.
You guys have fun names too.
This is my new ball python.
You've got the black pastel complex. You've got, and they've got you've got the spider complex. You have, God, what else do we have?
It's my
There's so many in ball pythons. It's kind of stupid how many allelic complexes. The clown and cryptic, the chocolate, the Wookiee, the spot nose.
Of course, there's a Wookiee.
Yeah, but you've got it in boa constrictors.
Okay.
So the boa woman caramel and I want to say call albino are allelic. So it's basically does the same thing that Ultra and AML do. When you bring them together, you get what they call the paradigm.
So in ball pythons, I'm gonna stop right there. If I take a Mojave gene and I have one small, I have the recessive trait, and I take a lesser gene, and these are the two that I remember from 2003, I get a white snake.
Right.
Is that white snake different than if I have two lesser genes or two Mojave genes?
Sort of.
Okay.
So if you have two Mojave genes,
okay,
the blue-eyed Lucy that you get from that is what they call a dirty Lucy. It's got a darker head. It's got a yellow stripe down the back. As they age, they develop a very yellow flush over them.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's what the super Mojave looks like. The super lesser tends to be more cream white. There is a faint yellow stripe that develops down the back. The lesser Mojave very strongly resembles the super lesser.
Okay.
In my experience, every single blue eye will develop a sort of yellow cast to it and develop a dorsal stripe that you can see visually.
Okay.
People are just used to seeing them as babies and they don't see them as adults as much, and they don't think about that or they don't believe it. But I've had my hands on a lot of them and I've seen it. I had a hypo Mojave lesser, and it, without having them in hand, and it's even hard to capture in pictures, but if you have them in hand next to a super lesser, they're about a half a tone different. But you literally have to have them right next to each other to be able to see that difference.
Okay.
So
interesting. So this,
like, if I just threw one of them at you and said, "What is this?" You'd be like, "Hey, it's a white snake. It could be a super lesser. It could be a lesser Mojave. It could be a special lesser. I don't know." But if you had them together, you could say, I don't know exactly what they are, but I can tell that they are different from one another.
Okay.
I don't know how you keep up with all of it, though.
I don't know how we keep up with any of this.
Morphs, man. I can't keep up with all your corn snake things. It's just a matter of being immersed in it all the time.
Strictly so I can learn myself.
It's just like anything else. It's trial and over and learn and learn and learn and learn. And then you get start getting the combos, and you've seen it so many times, and you've morph marketed it so many times, and it's interesting. Really interesting to see that does actually happen in other species. I didn't know that at all.
I mean, like I said, you see it all over the place. It's in retics, it's in berms, it's all over the place with these things. So,
So the final thing that I wanted to bring up, and I know I've talked to you about this before, but I figured it's a good time to talk about it again, and that is with my F1s for my Ladies Island stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I know I had asked you previously about if I had paired that to something that any morph combination or morph you want to talk about, whatever it is. I guess assuming that whatever morph in particular we want to use is inbred a lot, and you outcross it to one of those F1s, like you had drawn earlier, where it sort of opens things back up a little bit. How does that not throw such a curveball into what, like those single file sort of line bred genes, to where you don't see something more radical? If that makes any sense.
I mean, it does, but it doesn't.
Story of my life,
Travis.
You're not seeing something
Wyman.
more radical because while you're bringing a lot of new blood in, which is helping to dilute out essentially all of that accumulated bad genes that you had.
Mm-hmm.
You are still principally and primarily looking at a Mendelian trait. So if you breed your wild-caught animal to a tessera,
which is going to happen,
right? All you kind of care about is that tessera gene.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to continue selecting for the tessera gene and not all the other wild type genes that carry along with it, at least not intentionally. But those wild genes, if you had, in addition to tessera, say you had a gene for smaller eye and a gene for collapsed rectum or something.
Yeah.
Happens
all the time.
The wild type animal is going to have the good genes that counteract those two bad genes.
Mm-hmm.
So you're bringing those in, and those good clean genes are helping to flush out, the promotion of the heterozygosity of those bad genes. And so then you can take that outcrossed het tessera and breed it to another tessera, and you're not as likely to then end up tessera, but also homozygous small eye, homozygous rectal collapse.
Mm-hmm. I guess the way I'm sort of picturing it is like if I'm line breeding and we look at that as like a ladder,
Mm-hmm.
and we're looking at the F1s as like the ground that ladder is sitting on. How is it that nothing, like you don't see any sort of drastic results from those two, like that line bred stuff coming back down to basics? Or am I just not looking at it in the right way?
Well, it like I said, it goes back to that, you've got 24 to 36,000 other genes.
Mm-hmm.
One of those genes is playing into the tessera. Well,
Right.
really only the tessera gene is playing into the tessera. So that's why you don't see like a full system reset. Now, if you have, the Abbott line mixed into your tessera, and your Lady Islands are like the exact polar opposite of Abbott,
Mm-hmm.
and you bring that in, you're gonna have this kind of reset. So what you get out of that is it's not going to be super Abbott
Mm-hmm.
looking, because you're pushing a lot of those Abbott genes away by bringing the wild type genes in.
Okay.
But you can then take that, half Abbott and breed it back into an Abbott. You can get the homozygosity of the Abbott genes again to make it look really Abbott.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other bad genes that are in there are hopefully getting offset by those good clean genes that you brought in from the wild type animal.
So to some extent, it'd be fair to say Justin's got a couple of Ladies Island corns. This beautiful creamy base, this sharp orange saddle, a thin but defined black border on that saddle. We're going to breed it to my female ghost, who is a homozygous hypo, homozygous anery. It's also tessera. So, and I know through test breeding that is not a super tessera. It is not a too large gene. It's a one small, one large. We're going to get 50% tesseras on perfect math, right? We're talking about a small sample size, 10 to 16 eggs. Statistically, we're looking at half tesseras. Now, those tesseras, it doesn't matter. That entire clutch is going to carry the lineage of both animals color-wise, phenotypically. wherever that animal came from, maybe it's an Okatee animal or a Keys animal or a North Carolina, hell, it's a Pines Barren animal. We don't know. It's going to get those genes, even though they're not expressed in the animal that is already expressing the morph, right? Because we're only seeing this very light-colored animal. It's going to get those genetics equally as much as it is the Ladies Island genetics.
Yes.
Okay, so now, if we found a tessera in that clutch that was very Lady Island-like, it expressed the genetics of a Lady Island, and we bred that back to a Ladies Island corn, now we're going to start seeing something that's way more phenotypically Lady Island, but with the tessera gene expressed.
Right.
Okay.
I guess maybe the reason that I wonder so much about it is because in terms of like chondros, when you have the designer stuff, and then you take a nice Biak that was a red neonate, I guess even a yellow for whatever, that I guess doesn't matter as much, but you throw that into the designer stuff and it does wacky things.
Well, that's because you're making a hybrid.
Oh, get him, Dr. Wyman.
Hold on a second, damn it. I think that
if I take a really nice Biak and I throw it on top of a coastal, I'm going to make some really crazy shit.
Oh man!
Hit him with the facts, Dr. Wyman. We're out here for 1 hour, 50 minutes, 44 seconds.
I'm saying,
and he crushed his soul.
I'm fully aware that it's making hybrids, and I don't even care because chondros are awesome. But I'm saying, my thoughts as far as the Biak being thrown into that is because Biaks genetically are like 11% separated from the mainland stuff. So I think that plays a pretty big part in it. I could be completely wrong. But maybe that's
different species.
That's why I'm subspecies. Get it right.
Potential full species. Natush said that he just didn't want to go that far. He would leave it up to somebody else to make that leap.
But when we look at the range of corn snakes, though, I mean, I'd be curious to see how genetically different stuff from the Keys is from stuff up in Jersey.
Well, remember, those were different species.
But yeah. No.
Originally, those were different subspecies.
But
just given the distance,
you do not have the geographic. Let me get all the way through this before we contradict myself on it. You do not have the geographic isolation component there that you have with the green tree pythons. Like, you have a very distinct set of mountain ranges and valleys and stuff that broke those animals apart so that their genetics drifted. With corn snakes,
it's more of like a fade.
Right. There's a constant, while a Miami animal and New Jersey animal are essentially genetically unique from one another, there is a free range and exchange of genetics between them across that gradient all the way up and down the coast. Because a Miami animal can breed with a Tampa animal breed with a Jackson, or an Okatee or Okefenokee animal can breed with a Savannah animal. They can breed all the way up and down the coast, and there's genetic exchange all the way along the way. You can't have a Biak animal with the genetic exchange across to, Sarong and Aru and everywhere else because they've got that isolation component to them.
Every episode of the podcast, I got to bring something back to chondros. So,
well, I'll do the same with alternate.
It's the only way I can understand it.
It's sacrilege to take a Boy Scout road and breed it to a blackgap, right? Like, you don't do that.
Because you don't see that genetic exchange in the wild. Because no Boy Scout road animal is going to be able to just truck its ass all the way over to blackgap. It is going to die.
It's not going to make it all the way down Boy Scout Road.
It's a gauntlet.
If you've been there, it's like it's not getting on Highway 17. It's not going to make it. That's interesting. So we can just kind of look at it geographically to decide that it just wouldn't work. Okay. And if you look at the most northern peak of corn snake, pine barrens in that area, and the southernmost reverse peak of corn snakes, they're not that different, right? You'll get color differences, but you'll get size differences too. That's a big thing, is size. Down in Florida, corn snakes are a hell of a lot bigger than they are the further north you go.
Well, that's because they're not going to sleep for half of the
6
year
months out of the year,
up north.
right? Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting.
I think we've thrown enough really dumb questions at Doc for the eve.
I wouldn't say any of it was dumb questions.
I think it's,
like I said, they're very clear in my mind, but when it comes to me actually speaking them, then it just like it doesn't.
I think it's good to get a lot of this on air because we can sit there and we can internet foo a lot of this as much as we want. We can Google all this, but actually talking to somebody who's
chewing the fat.
Dr. Wyman, you could probably care less about corn snakes, but genetically you're ingrained in genetics.
Yes, I am ingrained in genetics, and I mean my first real true pet snake was a corn snake. I when I was 14, I bought myself an AML corn, my own money. $150 was a lot of money to a 14-year-old back then.
It's a lot for an AML corn.
Years.
And that son of a bitch made it to 24, 25. I don't know. He made it a long damn time. I mean,
that's hell yeah.
Made it through junior high, made it through high school, made it through college, made it through moving to Georgia, made it through marriage, birth of a child, getting through grad school, moving from Colorado to Georgia, Georgia to Maryland. Didn't just say that I had a corn snake in Georgia. Ignore that.
No.
I didn't know at the time. In fact, I didn't know until about a week before I left Georgia that they were illegal.
Allegedly.
Yes. Well, no, actually, factually.
Janet Wyman, roll with us for saying allegedly to help you.
Go ahead and hit us up at offtherecord.com if anybody has any issues with mine or public records. Go ahead and offtherecord.com. Check them out. It's a great website.
Yeah, I mean, he made it all the way through all of that. So he was a tough little son of a bitch.
Yeah,
I appreciated it for it.
The entire Genotypes complex, and I think as me and Justin move forward with this podcast, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other Genotypes complex animals. Very resilient, very bulletproof animals, very adaptive animals. For the most part, very passive animals. Very, very great complex to be dabbling your hands into.
I mean, and I would mostly recommend them as a good beginner snake. My only caveat there would be I would advocate people try to get older animals before that, when they get into it, because if you're new to snakes and you're having to deal with that little worm that is a mad freak escape artist and also a little cantankerous son of a bitch, because they don't like you when they're tiny.
No, they don't.
I can see how that might push a lot of people away over time. But, you get like an animal that's 8 months, 12 months old. I mean, at that point, they're bomb-proof. They're a lot more calm and mellow. They're still potentially escape artists if you're not keeping them properly, but they're less likely to get out than that little shoelace that can slide out through them.
Pack of shims is cheap.
Or just free range like Justin. That's fine.
Yeah,
it works.
I mean, I can't give Justin too much shit because I've had a free range kukri now twice.
Everyone has in our little group, and it's been glorious.
I have never had a free range anything.
So freaking happy when Day or anyone else is like, "Man, this got loose." I'm like,
This kukri's pissing me off. The fact that he figured out how to slide the glass door open on an AP cage.
Well, it's because it's an AP cage. You didn't get it from BlackBoxCages.com.
Come on.
BlackBox didn't exist when I got this cage.
So, Dr. Wyman, in the future, is there any plans on you maybe getting a couple corn snakes and messing around with some of the genetics?
We know some guys.
I know a person. I know people.
I don't know. I mean, I've thought about it, but More and more, I'm finding
stuff.
my tastes drift into just the weirdest shit possible.
Those kukris are cool as hell, dude.
Yeah, they are. They're mean little bastards, and they'll bloody the hell out of you.
Yeah, dude,
for those of you who aren't in our little group
crazy.
Chat,
Jesus.
Nice. That's a serious bite from a small snake.
Yeah, he messed me up something good.
I have found my Othriophis are the only snakes that can bite me as they're retracting their head. As you're holding them, instead of striking, they'll actually rub their head against you, just open their mouth it's really bite. Weird. Othriophis are weird. They're a great complex to mess with, but very weird animals. I say weird. Maybe it's very common. But
I mean, they're oddballs, and that's what I'm finding myself, the kukris, the beaked snakes, the calibars, the Scaphiophis and stuff. I've fallen down this hole of finding weird scientific papers and thinking, oh, hey, this would be a fun snake. And right now I'm thinking I really want mole snakes. African mole snakes are freaking bizarre, man.
Yeah, they are.
What about like North American mud snakes, stuff like that? They're gorgeous.
Much of a pain in the ass, dude. Hell no.
Never heard of anybody ever messing with them.
It's because they eat
the crayfish, but only after they shed during a certain time of the moon or something. Yeah,
that's weird. Yeah.
No, they eat
mud. You heard it here first.
Sicilians?
Oh yeah, I'm thinking the queen snakes. They're the ones that eat crayfish.
Yeah. Amphiumas
and Sicilians and salamander. Yeah, and I don't want to have to deal with.
That's weird.
I've already got a giant ass cage for one mourning gecko because I got a small mourning gecko colony for some snakes that are obligate lizard feeders, and I couldn't transition them as imports in, and I ended up with just one mourning gecko left over out of all that. So now I got a 24 by 24 by 30 with a single mourning gecko in it.
Geckos that breed easily, that are easy to take care of, crested geckos are like.
Oh, my kids got crested geckos.
Okay, I was about to say those babies freeze real well. They just
and see, that's what I said. She had babies popping out, and I was like, I could take those and I could use them. And she's, she gave me that face, and I was like,
so cute.
I won't feed off your babies.
I originally bred my Trotus in my Coleonyx group to feed to Alterna or any of the Mexicana kings because I was like, oh, the babies are perfect. Like it's the right size.
They're
my
tiny,
Trotus are a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
And then they hatch and they squeak. They make these cute little noises. I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this.
Well, the adults squeak too.
Yeah.
I had a variegatus. That son of a, you want an old timer little bastard, 14-year-old.
Wow.
Go ahead and join us next time on CornStars. It's going to be a great podcast. We're going to be starting here soon. I love Coleonyx are exceptional.
Oh, they're awesome. They are absolutely awesome. I love that little monster. And they squeak as adults.
Yeah.
If you go in the room and he saw you, he'd go.
Yeah, they're hilarious. Find them in the wild. They're amazing.
Ballsy. I mean, for a lizard that's only this big,
they're tiny.
He'd stand there and he'd push his chest up when he'd see you, and then you walk towards the tank, and then he's like, oh, "Shit!" and he dives back. But
and the little tail goes. They get the little tail wag.
Oh, yeah, the wag, the wave.
It's cool. Cool species.
All right,
awesome, guys.
Yeah. So this was episode 4 of CornStars, brought to you by BlackBoxCages.com and SilentHillReptiles.com. Check out both. Facebook, Instagram. All good people. You can't go wrong with either of them. No idea what we have planned for the next episode of this very show. We pretty much fly by the seat of our pants with this one. But tomorrow, THP 154 is happening. We're having Zach from Equatorial Ecosystems join us. There's going to be a lot to unpack in that episode because he keeps a ton of stuff. He's got dart frogs, he's got boas, he's got blood pythons, he's big into plants. So who knows what we'll get to with that one, but looking forward to it. And then Snakes and Stogies did not happen over the week on Monday because Phil was herping with Dr. Lothman. So I guess he found that to be more important than the show.
How
I
dare
wouldn't
he?
have done the same thing. I know. I told Crawdaddy, I was like, I hope it was worth it. He's like, oh, it was. So, that'll be back Monday though.
Yeah, they found a king, right?
I think they found a couple. I don't think they found just one.
Wow, that's awesome.
They were pretty healthy looking kings, man. Down in Phil's neck of the woods, Florida. Yeah. So, thank you everybody. We'll see y'all later.